Hey everyone, welcome to the Cash Heroes series, a place where we talk finance, cash, and stories of people behind it.
For today's episode, we have Vaidhyanathan with us, a chartered accountant by nature who has built and scaled the finance function at Freshworks during its growth phase. He currently is the finance controller of Airbase, a fast growing startup in the finance world. For today's topic, we want to highlight his story on how he managed the employee grants and cap table for Freshworks and the learning he brings along with it. On a high level, would love to understand what are the different stock incentive options that a company can offer to their employees. What are the differences between them, nuances in those, and what type of stock options should they consider at the stage of the company they are in?
At a very early stage, right? How it works is you have a lot of the employees, you have a lot of consultants working for you. You have few employees working for you. You will be paying them on an hourly basis. Sometimes you will want to offer them stocks. Sometimes you will not be able to offer them stocks. And especially for an Indian company with Indian employees, a lot of them don't understand. Even though there is explosion of startups in the market and employees joining startups in the market, now that most of them are very well funded, they go for the cash option, but employees do not take the stock option. And after Freshworks, maybe people will see the value of stocks and such.
That's true.
Yeah. So then you will employ some consultants and some employees. The consultant will be of a senior role, and you may have plans to give these consultants stock options at a later date, or give them consultant options, but then joining you as employees at a later point of time. That might be your consideration. And during these stages, you can absolutely offer ESOPs to consultants as well. In the same terms, you can give them a 1 year vesting, or a 2 year vesting, or a 4 year vesting. That will usually be allowed in your stock option plan. You will have a stock option plan that will that your lawyer will grant. Nobody reads it, nobody looks into it, but it's as what you call a blanketed document as your incorporation document. So it's a very generic document, and so you can offer it to your consultants. But if you have plans for them joining as employees and you want to continue the same option plan, same stock grant agreement, that will have a lot of complications. You will have to the employee, they have to exercise when they join you as an employee for the consultant contract, and then you will have to give them a fresh grant for 2 years. That will have a lot more complications. So think about that when you have some sort of an agreement like this. So don't complicate this too much, because this is something that I have seen at some really early stage startups doing this, and then they have to go to the board. In the initial stages, you will be mostly you and your co-founder will be the board. Later on, you will have some other investor who will be sitting with you, and you have to go to the board. And every single time you go to the board with some complicated agreement, that becomes unnecessary problems for you. So that's something that you can do. And early stage employees, so sometimes you add some of the employees as co-founders, right? When they get co-founders, they get different type of shares compared to an ESOP plan. Okay, so that also vests over a 4 year period, but they buy that initially. And when if the employee leaves within the vesting period, you have the right to repurchase the shares. So that's the type of agreement that you get into. And then that regular ESOP plan. ESOPs are typically that vest over 4 years with a 1 year cliff. Typically after 1 year, you can allow it to be vested over monthly or quarterly. Some of the best practices for if an employee friendly organization is vest over quarterly, and a lot of the organization take a monthly, and a lot of the organization take a quarterly approach, and some really people who want to control the employees moving out have a half-yearly vesting, something like that. And you can also plan your vesting to be loaded in the backend, meaning Amazon, the crisis times had 5%, 15%, 25%, and balance 45% over the 4 year period. So these were the different types of options that you have. And at a much later stage, you introduce RSUs.
I understand, there are different types of employees. As you mentioned, there could be a co-founder who could join in the middle, right?
Yeah.
There could be a senior exec who joins early stage, right? Depending on the stage and depending on who you bring in, right? How do you go about structuring what kind of stock options should you provide, right? And also understanding the why behind it.
Yeah, you should give the same type of options to every employee except for the co-founders. Co-founders should be a rarity. You'll have one or two co-founders joining, other than the main two founders or one founder who starts the company. Uh, uh, all the employees should get a stock option plan, but you can have an additional vesting clause for a senior executive who joins you. Maybe a target-based vesting clause that you can add to them. And whenever you do a reload of grants for the senior employees and such, you can introduce a grant, because at the earlier stages, you don't know what you are going to get into. So what you can do is you can tell them about a reload, but you can give them a reload with the target plan attached about engineering or sales. So it works basically with engineering and sales, and not for many other people, because engineering, the product roadmap gets fixed, the product team, the roadmap gets fixed, and usually the founder is the product guy, right? So so it works well only if you have a vesting additional vesting clause, like a target-based vesting, that you can introduce for the employees. And usually for the regular employees, don't make it too complicated, because once you scale, it is going to be a pain for you to expense of the stock comp when you get into US, right? Most of us don't understand how this works. You just get a report from the system, and that system says this is the cost, and your auditor goes and checks in. So the more complexities you bring in, the more complicated your expense expense options will become. And basically, for a US company, there are two types of grants. One is ISO and NSO. And for a early stage company, almost every single grant that you give will be an ISO, unless it's a very, very, very senior executive who gets 3 to 4% of the company at a Series A, Series B level. But practical at the time of exercise, it will become an ISO most of the time. And NSO is any grant that you offer to any employee outside US, because it's a US tax benefit based plan, which is ISO. And if you are not an US employee, then it automatically becomes an NSO. So incentive stock option, non-qualified stock options are what ISO and NSO is. It's as simple as that. Almost all your employees, US employees, should get an ISO, and everybody else should get an NSO, because it is a US tax benefit-based program. The type, how you benchmark yourself in giving the grants is something that you asked, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually, what people do is, what I suggest them do is, at the early stages, go to angel list, see what is being offered to the employees at that level, right? Especially to the senior founders. When you want to a CTO or someone, you just go and find an angel list and take 20, 30 companies who are at your stage, and take that and find a benchmark. And if you are at a Series A or Series B level, when you engage a recruiter, go and talk to the recruiter and be open about what is the, because you cannot lowball an employee, and you cannot grant them too much. Both are the things that I have seen have ended very badly for the employer. So sometimes you grant too much for them and you don't see value from them. At early stages, you think they will be able to add value, and they don't add value. And that becomes a lock for you and the employee. They cannot leave the organization because they will not be able to exercise that much stocks with that much money unless you give them an exit. Or you cannot fire them. It will look very bad for thinking that you are trying to save the equity, and you will fire anyone who has a much higher option pool. So benchmark yourself very, very competitively. And if you are an Indian company that is going to hire in the US, have a big portion of your ESOP pool to be kept for your sales hires, such, because they are going to come for a much higher equity, because you have to be competitive in the valley. You have to be really competitive in the valley. So you have to park your a lot of equity for them there. And usually the option pool that I have seen is 8 to 15%, 10% being the median for Indian companies. Indian companies that are founded in the US or in India or Singapore. And YC generally recommends the 15%. 15% is for because that is more of our valley companies. So you talk to your board, you talk to your investors and understand where the companies that they have invested in and what your risk appetite is, what their willingness for dilution is, and decide quite early about your ESOP pool, because if you have a 10% or a 12% and keeping up that is not going to get you into a lot of questions. But if you want to move from a 10 to 12% or a 12 to 15%, that is going to involve a significant dilution for you and your investors, and they are going to ask you a lot of questions. They are going to ask you whether you didn't think this through, whether you have not planned this, or have we hired more people, or have we given a lot more equity to the employees without planning. Because if you give a lot of equity and you are growing really fast, you may have to hire senior people, and the senior people are going to ask for a lot more equity. So have a plan. Even though it's not very strict, and you don't have to spend a lot of time, but at least you have to know, I'm going to hire a VP of sales, VP of engineering, or a CRO, or whoever it is. And I have to have this much of equity part for them in the next 2 years. And if you are going to have a funding round or such, your equity pool will increase, but it is not going to increase drastically. It is going to increase only to the level of liquidation that you're going to take.
What about RSUs?
So RSUs is, how the 409A valuation works is, the 409A valuation and your actual valuation have a huge gap in the early stages of company, because the investors invest in your story. The 409A valuer doesn't value your story. What he values, what is in your books. So slowly, when you start growing, both of these things come closer and closer. And the closer you are to the IPO or your exit plan, both of these things catch up, because the actual value and the market value, what market sees, catches up. So that's when, right? And the huge arbitrage of ESOPs is, you pay a very less amount to get a share that is going to be at of much higher value. Let's say you get shares for 10 cents, you exercise them, you sell them for $10, you have a 1000x return, right? 100x, 1000x. So that's the growth story. But when these things catch up, right, the arbitrage for them goes away. And also what happens is, when an employee wants to leave or when an employee wants to exercise, they will not be able to exercise. Let's say your share price is $10, your 409 valuation is $7.5. Okay, you have 10,000 shares. You have to spend $75,000 to buy the shares that are outstanding. And a lot of the employees are start getting unhappy, and you are not. The employees who want to leave will not be able to go. They are going to be extremely unhappy, and it creates a very bad atmosphere within the organization. And that's when most of the organization look at RSU as an option. So when these gaps come closer, and when employees are starting to feel the pinch, right? You and your HR team has the pulse of the organization better than anyone else. At that time, you start considering. So normally around series C, D, that's when you should start looking at it. And you, so when your 409A valuation becomes 30 to 40% of what your share price becomes, right? That's when you should actively start considering RSUs.
So now I'm tilting from a startup or a founder's perspective on towards finance teams, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you're part of you are a finance exec in a growing startup, right?
Yeah.
And to operationalize this, right, right from allocation to taxation towards what is the role of finance team at the different stages, and what are the best practices, pitfalls that they need to avoid, and if you can give me some anecdotal examples from your experience, right, on operationalizing the stock options at different stages, it'd be really helpful.
Absolutely. So in US, what I have seen is most of the US organizations have the lawyers do this, because they are they have the tax experts who are lawyers. They do this, but most of the other organizations I have seen have the finance people do this. Okay, if you are a founder or a CFO or a finance director or a VP finance, just invest in a tool. Because when we started up, right, when we started out in Freshworks, there were no tools. We were looking at multiple tools, and now the penetration is phenomenal. I have every single company that I see, every single organization I talk to, have a tie up with a Kata or a Solium, or there are 1,000 other tools that have come that are giving them at a much better discount. Just because I know what a pain handling it in Excel is, and updating every single time, and every single time an investor asks for it, or you want to see how much grants the employee has or such, a certain employee has, and that this will also help you plan your annual appraisal cycle much better, because you can pull out a report and see what employee has, what type of vesting cycle he is in. Is he in the third year? Is he in the fourth year? What sort of reload you should give? That's there. And tying out your equity cap table is something that's a pain if you have done that in your Excel file. So better invest in a tool, get your help on, because the earlier you do this, the less complicated it will become. And for example, you go for a debt round, you go for a round with a dilution, much higher dilution and such. These are all handled much better in the tool itself. You can pull out expense reports for the stock option expense reports from the tool itself. You can a lot of you can pull out 409 evaluations, not pull out, request for a valuation report from the solution itself. They usually have a valuation team, or they have a tie-up with someone who does that, and you can put it becomes much easier because you don't have to pull out reports and such. The taxation depends. If you are a company with which has multiple geographies where you have employees, most of these tools do well with US tax laws, or if you are a Indian company that has employees that has a tool specifically for India, they do Indian tax laws well. They don't handle the other location tax laws well. You and your team better understand what tax laws do they have, and also have a local firm who helps you keep updated on any change in the tax laws, because some countries like Australia are very, very aggressive on the ESOPs and cap gains. So it's very complicated there. So for example, RSUs, right? They are taxed as soon as they are vested. So most of the companies go with the ESOP as an option, where the employee has to actually exercise the option. So they are quite aggressive in those plans. So each country has these plans, and each country changes its plan such. But when an employee wants to exercise, right, a lot of the finance teams just go out of the way and help them understand what sort of tax implication they are going to have, how much they are going to tax they are going to pay. Because not only, for example, you have 10,000 options, the fair market value is $1 and the granted value is 10 cents. You are going to buy that 10,000 shares at for $1,000. That's not your only outflow, but you are going to pay the difference between the tax, difference between the FMV and the granted price. That's also going to be. So employees don't factor that in. And sometimes what happens is, when an employee exercises a huge set of options, they move from the one tax bracket to another tax bracket. They don't plan for that as well. So you come in because you have the payroll information. You usually work with the payroll team to understand what sort of tax bracket he's in, if he will move to the other tax bracket, because sometimes it will have a huge jump in their amount, and they may or may not be able to manage the cash flows well. So in that front, you have to help them, and you engage with the consultant from the local geography, because European countries, right, you don't know. How much ever you try, you won't know what is tax implication. In US, usually if you send this information to your payroll provider, they will automatically calculate the tax amount and they will let them know. They have AMT, alternate minimum tax. They have 83B election. There are a lot of concepts that are there. I will not get into in this call. That's absolutely up to the employee to make that selection and election. But you have engage with the local tax consultant for any other geography, and help them understand what sort of outflow they're going to go and how they can exercise. So that's something that we do. What I do in my current role and my previous roles as well, because a lot of employees have saved tax due to exercising them early. Again, that's not going to be a vouching for what your organization is going to be. You know your organization and what its growth goals and how you are going to make money out of it better than anyone else. But we as finance guys help them understand what sort of benefits you can get if you exercise at this time versus later on, or versus later on.
How frequently do you basically tweak your FMV, right? How frequently do you what are the operational steps involved in in fixing the valuation? How do you do it, and what are the challenges in it as well, and how do you communicate that? Yeah,
sure. So what happens is it happens. Let's say you have gotten a valuation in first of 2021, right? You have to get it on the date of 1st of 2022, because the 409A valuation as per US is valid for a year. If that is not refreshed after a year, then it becomes invalid. And when it becomes invalid, the tax authorities do not have a valuation anchor to understand what is the amount that needs to be taxed. So this changes if you do a funding round. If you do a funding, let's say you have raised the round of funding on 1st of July, okay? The 1 year reset happens. So you have to do a valuation on 1st of July of 2021. And the next valuation you have to do is on 1st of July of 2022. So this is how it works. So a valuation cannot be more than a year old. So that's the thumb rule that we have. In India, you have to get a valuation report every year. So what I also understood now is all the public companies and all the US companies, all the US or wherever the company is situated, if they have employees who are granted stocks, they have to get a valuation report for that company in India, which will be basically a mirror of the 409A valuation or the stock market price of the company on the particular date of when they are getting the valuation. So that's something most of the companies do. For the Indian tax authorities, the Indian tax authorities want to get a report based on which they can anchor the value of the stock in INR.
Apart from IPO, what are the other ways that there is a liquidation option available for employees, and when should a finance team or a founder consider, and why?
It should absolutely be at the discretion of the founder, and never should be at the time at a finance team's discretion. The CEO can give his inputs and such. Currently now, what has started happening is employees are getting option to liquidate the invested option at early stages itself, other than an IPO or at the time of acquisition. Every single round happens after Series B or Series C. Employees are offered, because historically the founders have been offered an option to sell as a portion of their shares to see some exit, right? Because the founders are historically underpaid from whatever job they have had, so they want to see some exit, and they also want to de-risk themselves a bit, not at a huge. Now a lot of the organization, Razorpay has been very open about them giving the options, and Unacademy and everybody else are taking a part of the money, and so it's called secondaries, right? What are secondaries? The existing shares that have been vested to the employees and the founders are being sold to investors rather than issuing new shares. So secondaries have historically been a big part of the funding rounds, wherein the founders and the employees sell. Usually what happens is the employees are allowed to sell a portion of the shares that are vested to them, let's say 10% or 15%. This is to encourage them. This is to say that, hey, you have been here for this long. Here is an exit that you are getting. But I am not giving you an exit that will make you completely uninterested in the future proceedings of the company, right? If I give you a 60% or 70% exit, then you are going to be uninterested because you have already received the money. So this is a delicate balance that you have to have. One important thing that we got to know is if you are going to offer this secondaries, you have to have an uniform selection criteria. Let's say that you have to have the first 100 employees that are continuing in the organization. Let's say that you have to have a 4-year tenure or a 5-year tenure. You cannot say pick and choose the employees that this person has been good, this person has not been good. And if you cannot offer a different threshold for different employees. You cannot say that 15% for someone and 10% for someone else. That also has to be uniform for whatever you can choose whatever threshold you want, but you have to offer that equally to all the employees. Okay. That's something that so secondaries have been, and a lot of the times. So what has happened is there are some other markets that have come in, right, wherein employees go out and list their shares. Most of the organization, what happens is they have a right of first refusal clause, meaning that I will. So, for example, someone else wants to buy the shares that you have already bought. The company can offer to buy the shares at the same price if you are willing to sell. If you are not willing to buy the shares at the same price, they can sell it to someone outside. So this is so what happens is people are putting their shares in the marketplaces that have come up. I don't remember some of them on the top of my head, but these have come up, and you can go and buy Stripe shares, basic shares, and whatever company shares. That's something that have come up. And the other option is the company itself buying back the shares that they have.
What is like a good benchmark or a good practice in the current startup ecosystem today for founders to consider when they should provide an exit in the form of a secondary or in the form of a buyback? And what is the logic they can take towards arriving at which employees to go after?
So a good benchmark would be 10 to 20%, but also it depends on. Mostly the earlier tenured employees get that kind of option, right? Someone who has joined 1 year back at your 10-year growth journey, doesn't make sense for them to get that same level. So you can pick and choose whatever number of the tenure, 5 years, 4 years, or whatever, and give them a 10 to 20%. It absolutely depends on the confidence of the investors. The investors have the confidence to buy your shares at the same price or at a slightly discounted price to get to buy your shares. That mainly is the case. How confident your investors are, and that will allow you to do this kind of an exercise, huge exercise of buying back all the shares of the company, or the investors by directly going and buying the shares from the employees. Usually, what happens is the practice that I have seen is the company buying back the shares and extinguishing the shares and issuing the shares to the investors. That's something that I have seen. They are not executing, directly transferring it to the investors, because the investors transferring it to individual employees doesn't make that much sense.
On an event of liquidation like this, right, an exit, right, what's the role of finance team here, and how do they go about operationalizing this, and what are the implications of tax, and how do you communicate that to the founder and employees as well?
Absolutely. So the finance team can help them negotiate the price of the shares, because usually the investors get a preferred share, right? And the round is priced in the preferred shares. And if you the employees get common equity, the common equity does not carry the same rights as the preferred shares. So what sort of discount that the common equity is going to carry from the preferred share, because there will be a 10 to 50% or to 20% discount from the price. So the finance team can help and negotiate the price and communicate this is the price that is going to be happening to be given to the employee. And handling the communication piece and doing the paperwork, right? So there are some documents that need to be shared with the employees if you are going to do this buyback or the investors buying the shares, meaning that you have to give your cap table, you have to give your high level cap table, you have to give your financial information for the last 2 years, or the audited financial statements for them to understand whether I need to be invested in this organization or I can sell the shares. I know and understand the financial health of the organization, right? So that's the idea behind this. By after understanding this, I choose to hold the shares, and when you offer a 10% or a 15% of the vested shares, right? The employee can absolutely choose to sell or not choose to sell. You can never force them to sell the shares because so that they are making an informed decision. Whatever you can provide to help them make an informed decision. Usually, your lawyers will help you in making that. What lawyers and your advocates can help you in understanding what sort of documents that you need to provide, because it's more like a public company exercise to ensure there is a fair practice of not coercing the employees to sell the share or coercing the employee to hold back the share. So that's the idea behind this. Communicating and then doing the paperwork, right? Now, if you have a kata or something like that, you can allow the employees to do it through kata or a solium or whatever solution that is there, and they can do that. And once that happens, the finance team will help them distribute the money and help that being brought back to India. And whenever the money comes to each country, right, there is going to be a lot of questions that are going to be asked, and the finance team will help under them distribute the documents that needs to be given to the employees to present to the bank, to RBI, to the income tax authorities in the future, because suddenly you are going to get a huge bump in your bank account.
Right.
So these are the steps that usually the finance team is involved.
Awesome. So one, again, sub question to that, right, which is very specific to tax, right? I understand the complexity of tax varies at the time of liquidation based on the country they are in, etc., right?
And the holding period they have also.
Correct. So if you can give me one example of, let's say, a US-India setup, right? Like from your experience at Freshworks, right? What are the nuances in tax involved in different types of stock options when at time of liquidity happens? How does it affect the company in certain cases, and how does it affect any pitfalls to avoid upfront on those cases in communication, in paperwork, etc.?
Sure. So what happens is, first of all, from the employee perspective, when an US-India transaction happens, right, the US shares, even if they are listed in US or unlisted in US, they are considered as unlisted equity for Indian tax purposes. For Indian unlisted equity, the short-term capital gains is your regular tax rate, and your long-term capital gain is 20% plus surcharge and cess. So, for example, it is 20.8% for someone who is below 50 lakh range. So, this is the thumb rule that you have. Okay. So, and the holding period is going to be 2 years. So, if you want to get the benefit of long-term capital gains, you have to hold the stocks for 2 years or more. If you hold for less than 2 years, your whatever difference between the exercise price and the share purchase price is going to be treated as equity. If an employee has exercised earlier on, they would have already paid the different tax difference between that time's 409A price and the exercise price. In the previous example, 10 cents to $1, right? They have paid the tax difference for 90 cents. So now the price for you is going to be $1. Let's say you are selling the share for $10. Now the difference between the difference that needs to be considered for taxes, $10 minus $1, and not $10 minus 10 cents. If someone is exercising now, the tax is going to be $10 minus 10 cents. If someone has exercised earlier on, $10 minus $1. What also is going to happen is, if an employee exercises and sells immediately within a month or 2 months, then it's all going to be considered as employment income and not short-term capital gain. That's again a complexity that comes. I will not go into too much into detail because it will be a different podcast. And for an organization, right, what happens is, when an employee sells the shares and buys the shares and sells it immediately, or within a 2 month or a 3 month period in the US, it is considered as employee compensation expense. It is considered as an employee compensation expense. So it is going to hit your P&L whenever you do a repurchase. So that's on. Usually, what happens is your stock option expenses hit your P&L once you reach a scale, and it's going to be a very minuscule amount because the options are going to be from the beginning of the company when the prices are very, very less, and it's going to balloon up only when you close the IPO. But when you do a repurchase of shares, this $10 minus 10 cent is going to be considered as a equity compensation, and it's going to hit your P&L. So be planned for that, and let your board also know about this. Let your board also know about this. So this is something the company should be doing.
Typically, when do you start and end your workday?
I started early in the morning, and I work for a US India type of reporting situation, right? So my manager is too kind, and she ends my calls by 9:30 or 10. So because I have a daughter, right? Me and my wife plan our work day. I start early and I end my day early. My wife stays up late and she wakes up also late. So this is the compromise that we need to have when we are all working from home.
That's great. Great. In that case, how much sleep do you get?
Not much. Not as much as I would like. Not as much as I would like at all.
Okay, let's keep it there then. Great. So if there is one podcast or good piece content suggestion that you would give for finance people part of fast growing startups, right? Hey, you should subscribe to this or SaaS. What would that be?
Generally so Tom Tungus, right? Tom Tungus is someone we insist on everyone should read.
Tom Tungus is the godfather. Yeah. Great. So for budding finance execs who are joining an early stage company, right? If there is, apart from the core finance skill that they have developed, if there is any additional skill that you would recommend them, what would that be?
One thing is be extremely proactive and take up any challenge that comes your way, because it's more of a mindset, because you don't know what sort of challenges that are going to come to you. You are never going to have if you are working in a fast pace growth startup, you are never going to have a quiet time. You are never going to have a planned month or a year or a quarter ahead. And that's a privilege, not a pressure, right? That's again a privilege and not a pressure, because at Freshworks, the 5 years that I worked, I grew up 50x, 60x as a finance professional. And not many people get that kind of, I'll always look back at that period as the formation years for me, because the experiences that I have got, I would not have gotten anywhere. It's always a privilege. Never take pressure to heart, and put your hand up at any point of time and say, I will do it. I will. Yeah. And
Absolutely
say,
true.
I don't know. Say, I don't know, because we don't know a lot of things when we do in the startups. We figure things out as we go. Don't punish yourself for not knowing something, and don't also hold yourself and say that I will do only this and not anything else, because you are going to grow whether you like it or not. How fast you grow depends on your mind.
Great. Absolutely. Really insightful in that one. My last question, right? So if you have a magic wish right now, be it personal or, one on your personal life and then professional life, right? What would you go back and change with that wish?
In the professional life, right? We threw people at a problem a lot of the times in the earlier stages. Okay. We would have taken some steps back and see how we can fix the problem with the tools that we have. What sort of systems that we can explore and do. That's something that I will do. And personal life, what do you call? I should have met my wife much earlier and traveled a lot more.
That's great. Yeah, get more sleep and travel a lot more.
Yeah.
Great. It's been amazing, Vaidhi. Thanks for taking the time, and the entire session was super insightful. I hope our listeners have enjoyed this session as well.
Absolutely. This is more of India centric, because that's the experience that I have had. India US centric for SaaS startups. So if you have any specific questions, you can reach out to me. I think
I'm going to link up your previous podcast on ESOPs and then the blog post as well, so that for people who want to understand why and then also the operational nuances, they can. And feel free to reach out to Vaidhi at any point. An amazing person at heart and super helpful in nature.